She wasn't supposed to win. That's what made her victory so devastating. For 5 years, Lucien Draven believed his wife was nothing more than expensive furniture. Beautiful, silent, breakable. Tonight, standing in a crimson dress that looked like spilled blood under the chandeliers, Serafina Vale proved him catastrophically wrong. The mafia boss who controlled continents just lost everything to the woman sleeping beside him. Want to know how the perfect wife became the perfect weapon? Stay until the end. This is a story about power, betrayal, and the most dangerous kind of revenge. Like this video, comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels, and follow for more stories that'll keep you up at night. The penthouse smelled like expensive cigars and older money. Serafina Vale stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, 40 stories above the city, watching headlights crawl through streets her husband owned in ways that would never show up on any deed. Her reflection stared back at her, hair pulled into a severe chignon, diamond earrings that cost more than most people's houses, a champagne silk gown that whispered when she moved. Perfect. Polished. Empty. Behind her, Lucien Draven's voice cut through the room like a blade through butter. I don't give a fuck what Romano thinks he deserves. He gets what I tell him he gets, or he gets a bullet. Those are his options. She didn't turn around. 5 years of marriage had taught her that Lucien didn't speak to her during business calls. She was decoration. Expensive, well-maintained decoration, but decoration nonetheless. The phone slammed down. Crystal rattled in the bar cart. You're still awake. It wasn't a question. Lucien never asked questions. He made observations, issued commands, stated facts that bent reality to match his will. I couldn't sleep, Serafina said, her voice the same temperature as the window glass. Take a pill. I don't like how they make me feel. Then suffer quietly. I have the Milano meeting at 6. His footsteps crossed the marble floor. Italian, naturally, shipped stone by stone from a quarry his family had owned for 3 generations. Everything Lucien touched carried the weight of legacy, power, inevitable dominance. She watched his reflection approach. Tall, dark-haired, handsome in the way poisonous things often are. 42 years old and more dangerous than he'd been at 25, when he'd first smiled at her across a gallery opening and made her believe she was special. Stupid girl. Serafina. She turned. Yes? You're attending the gala tomorrow night. Givenchy sent over 3 dresses. Pick one. I don't care which. Of course. His eyes traveled over her like she was a car he was considering trading in. Wear your hair down, and that sapphire necklace I bought you, the one that matches your eyes. My eyes are blue-gray. I said the sapphires. He moved past her toward the bedroom, already dismissing her from his thoughts. Don't wait up. I have calls to Taipei. The door closed. Serafina stood there for another 30 seconds, practicing the breathing exercises that kept her from screaming. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Repeat until the urge to shatter every window in this gilded cage passed. It always passed. She crossed to the bar cart and poured 2 fingers of Macallan, the 40-year, the one Lucy saved for visiting dignitaries. Drank it in one swallow, poured another. The city sprawled below her like a circuit board, all lights and connections, power flowing through invisible channels. Lucien thought he controlled it. He had the politicians, the judges, the police captains. He had the shipping routes and the supply chains and the offshore accounts that made dirty money clean. What he didn't have was her. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. The thought sent something cold sliding down her spine. Not fear. Something else. Something that had been growing in the dark spaces of her mind for months now, feeding on every dismissal, every affair, every moment he'd looked through her instead of at her. She finished the second drink and set the glass down carefully. In the bedroom, Lucien's voice rumbled through the wall. Mandarin tonight, his accent flawless. The man spoke 7 languages and wielded them like weapons, cutting deals in native tongues, making men feel comfortable right before he destroyed them. Serafina spoke 9. He'd never asked. Akik. The gala was exactly what she'd expected. Grotesque wealth masquerading as sophistication, criminals in tuxedos pretending they'd earned their money through legitimate means. The ballroom stretched the length of a city block, all gold leaf and crystal, champagne flowing like water, while armed men in expensive suits stood at every exit. Serafina wore the midnight blue Givenchy and the sapphires. Her hair fell in waves down her bare back. Men's eyes followed her across the room, but carefully, with the kind of caution reserved for things that belonged to someone more dangerous than they'd ever be. Lucian's hand rested possessively on her lower back as he worked the room. This was her purpose, to stand beside him looking beautiful, to laugh quietly at appropriate moments, to be living proof that Lucian Draven possessed the finest of everything. Draven. A man with silver hair and a face like old leather appeared from the crowd. Giovanni Marchetti, head of the Marchetti family out of Naples. Heard you're making moves into energy. Ambitious. Inevitable, Lucian corrected, his smile sharp. The Constantine cartel's bleeding money. Someone's going to step in. Might as well be someone who knows what they're doing. Might start a war. Might. Lucien's fingers tightened slightly on Serafina's back, the only sign of tension. Wars end. Winners don't. Marchetti's eyes flicked to Serafina, then away. Your wife looks lovely tonight. She always does. Lucian released her, already moving toward the next conversation. Get yourself a drink, Cara. I need to speak with Giovanni. Dismissed. Serafina smiled, the small, pleasant smile she'd perfected, and drifted toward the bar. Around her, the Gala pulsed with barely contained violence dressed up in evening wear. She recognized faces from news reports, from sealed court documents, from the kind of files that disappeared when inconvenient questions got asked. Champagne, she told the bartender. Mrs. Draven. The voice came from her left, honey smooth and deliberately provocative. You look absolutely radiant tonight. Does Lucian know how lucky he is? Valeria Cruz. Of course. Serafina turned slowly, giving herself time to lock down every emotion that wanted to show on her face. Valeria stood there in crimson, always crimson, like she wanted to advertise the blood on her hands. Her dark hair swept to one side, her smile the kind sharks wore right before they bit. Valeria. How unexpected. Is it? Valeria moved closer, invading space the way she invaded everything else. Lucien's business, his bed, his attention. Lucien invited me personally, said he wanted his key people here tonight. Something about celebrating the cartel acquisition. The bartender set down Serafina's champagne. She picked it up, studying the bubbles rising through golden liquid. He's very confident. He's Lucien Draven. Confidence is genetic. Valeria's eyes traveled over Serafina like she was livestock. That dress is stunning, very virginal. Is that the look you're going for? There it was, the knife sliding in smooth. Serafina sipped her champagne. I've always preferred subtlety, but I know that's not everyone's strength. Subtlety? Valeria laughed, the sound carrying across the room. Several heads turned. Sweetheart, in this world, subtle gets you forgotten. Loud gets you remembered. Loud gets you fucked? Serafina's voice didn't change temperature. Is that the word you're looking for? Valeria's smile froze. Because yes, Serafina continued, still studying her champagne, I'm aware Lucien fucks you. He fucks a lot of people. He's very democratic in his appetites. But fucking isn't the same as mattering, is it? You're useful. You're entertaining. You're temporarily diverting, but you're not irreplaceable. The words hung in the air between them. Around them, the party continued. Laughter, clinking glasses, deals being made in whispers. Valeria's hand tightened on her own glass. You think you matter? You're wallpaper, Serafina. Pretty wallpaper, I'll give you that, but still just decoration. When was the last time Lucian asked your opinion on anything that mattered? When was the last time he asked yours? Serafina met her eyes. Or does he just tell you where to be and what position to assume? For a moment, genuine fury flickered across Valeria's face. Then she laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. Enjoy your champagne, Mrs. Draven. Enjoy being the wife. That title's the only power you'll ever have. She walked away, hips swinging in that crimson dress, already scanning for her next target. Serafina drained her champagne and set the glass down. Her hands were steady. That was good. 5 years ago, that confrontation would have sent her to the bathroom in tears. 5 years ago, she'd believed love could exist in a man like Lucien Draven. Now she knew better. Now she knew exactly what Lucien was. A black hole of ego and ambition, consuming everything in his orbit, giving nothing back. And she knew something else too. She knew how to destroy him. Atiches. The plan had started 6 months ago, in a lawyer's office in Geneva, when Serafina had learned about the inheritance. Her father, dead 15 years now, had left behind a trust she'd never known existed. $14 million, compounding quietly in Swiss accounts, while she'd married Lucien and become his perfect accessory. The lawyer, a dry old man named Erickson, had slid the papers across his desk with arthritic fingers. Your father was very specific about the conditions, he'd said. The money only transfers to you, never to a spouse. He was quite insistent about that. Serafina had stared at the numbers. 14 million, more money than she'd ever imagined having, more money than Lucien had given her access to in 5 years of marriage. Did he say why? He said, Erickson had consulted his notes. He said, my daughter will need this if she ever finds herself in a cage. Those were his exact words, Mrs. Draven. A cage. Her father had known. Somehow, he'd known. She'd signed the papers, activated the accounts, and then, very carefully, she'd started building something Lucien would never see coming. The energy sector was bleeding. The Constantine cartel, a loose network of Russian oligarchs and Middle Eastern investors, controlled 70% of the privatized energy infrastructure in Eastern Europe. It was worth billions, and it was hemorrhaging money due to mismanagement, infighting, and corruption even by criminal standards. Lucien wanted it. He had been positioning for a takeover for 2 years, using shell companies and proxy buyers, assembling pieces of the puzzle while the Constantines tore themselves apart. What he didn't know was that someone else had been moving faster. Someone quieter. Someone who understood that real power wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. Serafina had used her inheritance to buy shell corporations, to hire lawyers in 6 different countries, to establish anonymous LLCs and offshore holding companies. She'd moved through the same spaces Lucien operated in, but like a ghost. No name, no face, nothing to connect the transactions back to the mafia boss's wife. It had taken months. Careful months. Terrifying months. But now she owned 43% of the Constantine cartel, more than anyone else. More than Lucien ever would. She just had to wait for the right moment to reveal it. Pascal. The dinner happened 3 weeks before the gala. Lucien had invited 12 people, power players from his organization, men who'd bled for him, killed for him, built empires in his shadow. The dining room table could have seated 20, but Lucien preferred these intimate gatherings where he could hold court, dispensing wisdom and decisions like a king. Serafina sat at the far end of the table, wearing a pale gray dress that made her disappear into the expensive wallpaper. Around her, men talked business in loud voices, interrupting each other, jockeying for Lucien's attention. The Constantine deal's as good as done, Marco Santoro said, refilling his wine glass. Victor's ready to sell, we just need to name the price. We name the price when I say we name the price, Lucien corrected. Victor's desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. We wait until he's not just willing to sell, we wait until he's begging. Laughter around the table. Valeria sat 3 seats down from Lucien, her hand resting casually on the table, her fingers occasionally brushing his arm. Serafina watched it happen, her face empty of expression. How much longer? That was Dmitri, Lucien's enforcer, a man with hands like sledgehammers and a face that looked like it had lost fights with concrete. We've been circling this for 2 years. As long as it takes. Lucien carved into his steak, rare, almost still bleeding. Power isn't about moving fast. It's about moving inevitably. When I take the Constantine cartel, I want everyone to understand it was never a question of if, only when. Speaking of when, Valeria said, her voice carrying that honey acid quality, I heard Victor's wife left him, took the kids to London. Apparently she got tired of being married to a failure. More laughter. Lucien smiled. Smart woman, he said. Knows when to abandon a sinking ship. His eyes flicked to Serafina. Just for a second. But that second stretched, and in it she saw exactly what he thought. That she wasn't smart enough to leave, wasn't capable enough to exist without him, wasn't anything more than what he'd made her. Something in her chest went very cold. Serafina. Lucien's voice cut across the table. You've been quiet tonight. What do you think about Victor's wife? About women who walk away? The table went silent. Everyone turned to look at her. This was entertainment now, watching Lucien toy with his wife, watching her fumble for words, watching her remember her place. Serafina set down her fork carefully. I think Victor's wife understood something important. Which is? That some ships aren't sinking. They're already sunk. They're just floating on habit, and everyone's too afraid to say it out loud. The silence changed quality, became thicker. Lucien's smile didn't reach his eyes. Interesting perspective, though I'd imagine Victor would disagree. Victor's opinion on his own failure isn't really relevant, is it? Serafina picked up her wine glass. The question isn't what the sinking ship thinks about itself. It's whether the rats are smart enough to leave before they drown. Someone, Marco maybe, choked on his drink. Lucienne stared at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. Are you calling Victor a sinking ship? I'm saying his wife was smart to leave, that's all. And if someone called me a sinking ship? His voice went very soft. What would you say to that? The question hung there like a blade. Around the table, men shifted in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their plates. Serafina met his eyes. I'd say they don't know you very well. It was the right answer, the safe answer, the answer a good wife gave. But something in her delivery, some tiny inflection, some microscopic pause, made it sound like a lie. Lucien's jaw tightened. Then he laughed, and the table relaxed, and the moment passed. But it didn't pass for Serafina. Because in that moment, looking at her husband across 12 feet of antique table, surrounded by his soldiers and his mistress and his empire, she'd realized something fundamental. She wasn't afraid of him anymore, and that changed everything. The breaking point came 2 days later in a way that was almost boring in its cruelty. Serafina was in Lucien's study, his private office, the room where he kept the files that would put half the city in prison. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she'd learned to pick the lock months ago, and Lucien was in Milan for meetings. She wasn't looking for anything specific, just information, patterns, weaknesses. The filing cabinet was unlocked, Lucien's arrogance, assuming no one would dare enter his sanctuary. She'd been flipping through contracts when her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, a photo. Lucien and Valeria in a hotel room Serafina recognized from their anniversary trip last year. Same view, same curtains, different woman. The text that followed was worse than the photo. Thought you should know where he really was during your anniversary dinner. Enjoy being the wife. A friend, Serafina stared at the photo, at Lucien's hand on Valeria's throat, at the expression on his face, raw pleasure, the kind he'd never shown with her, not even in the beginning when he'd pretended she mattered. She waited for the tears, for the anger, for the heartbreak. None of it came. Instead, there was just clarity, cold, crystalline clarity. Lucien would never change. He would never see her as anything more than property. And no amount of trying, of being perfect, of waiting for him to remember why he'd married her, none of it would ever matter. She was alone in this marriage. She'd always been alone. The only question was what she planned to do about it. Serafina set down her phone, looked at the filing cabinet, at the contracts and the account numbers and the network of power Lucien had spent 2 decades building. Then she started taking photos. Every document, every number, every name. It took 3 hours. When she was done, she locked the filing cabinet, left the study exactly as she'd found it, and went to make a phone call to Geneva. Ishik. The weeks that followed were a blur of secret meetings, encrypted calls, and transactions that happened in the spaces between Lucien's attention. Serafina moved through her life like a ghost in her own skin, perfect at dinner parties, silent during Lucien's business calls, ornamental during the increasingly rare times he remembered she existed. But behind that perfect facade, she was building something. The Constantine cartel was fracturing faster now. Victor had made desperate moves, trying to consolidate power, and it had backfired spectacularly. 2 of his partners had walked away. 3 more were looking for exits. And Serafina was there, offering them exactly what they wanted: anonymity, clean money, and a stake in something that wouldn't collapse in the next fiscal quarter. She never met them in person. Everything happened through lawyers, through encrypted channels, through the kind of careful operational security that would have impressed Lucien if he'd known about it. He didn't know. He never looked at her long enough to see what was happening right in front of him. By the time the gala invitations went out, Serafina controlled the majority share of the Constantine cartel, and Lucian still thought he was about to win. By the night before the gala, Serafina stood in her closet, a room the size of most people's apartments, staring at the 3 Givenchy dresses Lucian had selected. Midnight blue, champagne, dove gray, all of them designed to make her disappear into expensive backgrounds, to be beautiful without being memorable, to enhance Lucian's image without threatening it. She looked at them for a long time. Then she walked to the back of the closet, to the section where she kept the dresses Lucian never saw, the ones she'd bought with her own money from the inheritance. The crimson dress hung there like a declaration of war. Serafina pulled it out, held it against her body, studied her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at her looked dangerous. Good. She laid the dress carefully on her bed, then went to the safe hidden behind the Chagall painting in the dressing room. Inside was the diamond necklace she'd commissioned 3 months ago, a serpent, coiled and ready to strike, each scale a flawless stone that caught light like liquid fire. Lucien had never seen it. He'd never know it existed until tomorrow night, when it was too late. Serafina closed the safe, turned off the lights, and went to bed alone. In the next room, she could hear Lucien on another call, his voice carrying through the walls as he orchestrated the final pieces of a takeover that would never happen. She closed her eyes and smiled in the darkness. The gala was in 8 hours. Serafina woke before dawn, adrenaline singing in her veins. This was it, the moment when everything changed. She went through her morning routine with mechanical precision. Shower, skincare, the kind of maintenance that kept her looking like the perfect wife. But when she opened the closet, she didn't reach for the blue Givenchy. The crimson dress slid over her skin like armor. She styled her hair differently, swept to one side dramatic, the kind of look that demanded attention instead of deflecting it. The serpent necklace settled cold against her collarbone, its diamond scales catching the light with every breath. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. That was the point. Lucien was already gone, early breakfast meeting with his lawyers, finalizing the contracts for the Constantine acquisition that would never be signed. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Wear the blue dress. See you tonight. Serafina threw the note away. Then she sat down at her laptop and made the final call. The lawyer in Geneva answered on the first ring. Mrs. Draven, everything's prepared per your instructions. The paperwork will be filed at precisely 8 p.m. tonight. Once it's registered, there's no reversing it. I understand. This is going to create significant legal complications. Mr. Draven will have recourse to... Mr. Draven will have no recourse to anything, Serafina interrupted, her voice steady. I've been very careful about that. Every transaction is clean. Every document is legitimate. He can be angry, he can be shocked, but he can't undo what I've done. Silence on the other end. Then, you're certain you want to proceed? Serafina thought about 5 years of invisibility, of being decoration, of watching Lucien parade his affairs while she smiled and played her role, of the moment at dinner when he'd looked at her with contempt, so certain she was too weak, too stupid, too trapped to ever be a threat. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Very well. 8 p.m. tonight, the cartel ownership transfers to you. Congratulations, Mrs. Draven. You're about to become one of the most powerful people in Eastern European energy. The call ended. Serafina sat there, staring at her reflection in the laptop screen. The woman looking back at her wore crimson and diamonds and an expression that could cut glass. In 12 hours, Lucien Draven would stand in front of his entire world and announce his greatest victory, and she would destroy him with the truth. The thought should have scared her. It didn't. It felt like breathing for the first time in 5 years. She closed the laptop, stood, and walked to the window. The city sprawled below, all those lights and connections, power flowing through channels Lucien thought he controlled. But tonight, she would show him what real power looked like. Tonight, she would show him the cost of treating people like possessions. Tonight, the woman he'd ignored for 5 years would become the only thing he'd ever see again. Serafina pressed her hand against the window glass, feeling the cold seep into her palm. Somewhere across the city, Lucian was celebrating a victory he didn't know he'd already lost, and the countdown to his destruction had already begun. The limousine arrived at 6:30. Serafina watched from the penthouse window as it pulled up to the curb 40 stories below, a sleek black predator among the evening traffic. Her phone buzzed. The driver, confirming he was ready. She didn't answer. Instead, she stood there in the crimson dress, the serpent necklace cold against her throat, and let herself feel the weight of what was about to happen. In 90 minutes, the ownership transfer would finalize. In 2 hours, Lucian would step onto that stage believing he owned the world, and she would end him. Her hands trembled, just slightly, just enough to remind her she was still human, still capable of fear, still teetering on the edge of something she couldn't take back. Then she thought about Valeria's hands on Lucian's chest, about the dinner table where he'd looked at her with contempt, about 5 years of being invisible while standing in plain sight. The trembling stopped. Serafina picked up her clutch, black crocodile, impossibly expensive, a gift from Lucian on their 3rd anniversary when he'd still pretended to care, and walked out of the penthouse without looking back. The elevator descended in silence. 40 floors of dropping through the building Lucian owned, past the apartments he rented to people who paid in cash and didn't ask questions, past the offices where his legitimate businesses operated as fronts for everything else. She watched the numbers fall. 38. 35. 30. Her reflection stared back from the polished elevator walls. The woman in crimson looked like someone who'd burn the world down and not lose sleep over it. Good. The doors opened. The lobby stretched before her, marble and gold, doormen in uniforms that cost more than their monthly salary, the kind of ostentatious wealth that screamed new money trying to look old. Mrs. Draven. The night doorman, Joseph, 60 years old, worked for Lucian for 15, held the door open. You look absolutely stunning tonight. Thank you, Joseph. Mr. Draven already left. Should I tell him you're on your way? No need. I'll surprise him. Something flickered across Joseph's face. Concern, maybe. Or recognition that the woman walking past him wasn't the same one who'd lived here for 5 years. The limousine door opened. Serafina slid inside and the city disappeared behind tinted glass. The Grandeur Hotel rose like a monument to excess in the heart of the financial district. Lucien had bought it 6 years ago, gutted it, rebuilt it into something that catered exclusively to people who operated outside the law. The ballroom alone could hold 500. Tonight, it would hold 300 of the most dangerous people in the Western Hemisphere. Serafina's phone buzzed. A text from the Geneva lawyer. Transfer complete, it's done. You now control 43% of the Constantine Energy Cartel. Congratulations. She stared at the words until they blurred. 43%. More than Victor Constantine owned, more than Lucien would ever own. The limousine pulled up to the hotel entrance. Red carpet, velvet ropes, photographers who'd been paid to forget every face they saw tonight. Serafina waited while the driver came around, opened her door, extended his hand. She stepped out into flashbulbs and whispers. The photographers captured her anyway. Old habits, the instinct to document beauty even when they'd been told not to. She heard the clicks, felt the weight of attention, and kept walking. The hotel entrance swallowed her. Inside, the lobby pulsed with barely contained violence dressed in Armani and Valentino. She recognized faces. Senators who voted on crime bills while taking money from crime lords, judges who dismissed cases for the right price, CEOs whose companies laundered billions through quarterly reports. Serafina. She turned. Marco Santoro stood there with a drink already in his hand, his face flushed with alcohol or excitement or both. Lucien's second in command, the man who'd been there the night at dinner, who'd laughed when Lucien had tried to humiliate her. Marco, his eyes traveled over her dress, lingered on the necklace. That's different. Does Lucien know you're wearing red? Lucien doesn't pick my clothes. Since when? He laughed, but it sounded uncertain. You feeling all right? You look different. I feel perfect. She smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. Where is he? Upstairs, private room with Victor and the lawyers finalizing the contracts. Marco leaned closer, his breath heavy with whiskey. This is it, Serafina. After tonight, we're untouchable. Lucien's about to control the biggest energy infrastructure in Eastern Europe. Nothing's stopping us. Nothing, she agreed. You should be proud. Your husband's about to become the most powerful man and he's not my husband. The words came out before she could stop them. He's a man I'm married to. There's a difference. Marco's smile faltered. What? Nothing. Forget it. Serafina moved past him toward the ballroom. Enjoy your celebration, Marco. I have a feeling tonight's going to be memorable. She left him standing there, confusion written across his face like graffiti. The ballroom was exactly what Lucien would design if given unlimited money and no taste. Chandeliers the size of cars, gold leaf on every surface, a ceiling painted with some Renaissance knockoff that was supposed to look cultured but just looked desperate. 300 people filled the space. Serafina recognized most of them. Crime families from 6 continents, arms dealers, human traffickers, the occasional terrorist financier, all of them dressed like they were attending the opera instead of a meeting of psychopaths. This was Lucien's world, and after tonight, it would be her hunting ground. Well, well. Valeria appeared from the crowd like a shark sensing blood. She wore black tonight, tight, revealing, designed to make men stupid. Look who decided to wear a real color. Finally got tired of disappearing into the furniture? Serafina turned slowly. Valeria, you look exactly like I expected. Expensive on the outside, cheap underneath. Valeria's eyes narrowed. Careful, you're out of your depth tonight. Am I? Serafina let her gaze travel over the other woman with the same clinical assessment Valeria had used on her countless times. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. How about you? Still auditioning for the role of wife? Or have you accepted you're just the help? The words hit like a slap. Around them, conversations continued, but Serafina saw heads turn, saw people register that something was happening. Valeria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Listen to me very carefully, you useless bitch. I don't know what's gotten into you tonight, but you need to remember your place. You're nothing. I'm the wife, Serafina interrupted. That's what you keep reminding me, isn't it? That I have the title you want? So which is it, Valeria? Am I nothing, or am I everything you'll never be? Valeria's hand twitched. For a second, Serafina thought she might actually swing. Part of her wanted it. Wanted the excuse to hit back, to feel bone against knuckles, to stop being civilized. But Valeria was smarter than that. She smiled instead, vicious and cold. Enjoy tonight. Enjoy being the wife. Because after Lucien closes this deal, after he becomes untouchable, you're going to disappear. He's already talking about divorce, about how much easier his life would be without dead weight. Is that what he tells you in bed? That I'm the problem? Serafina's voice stayed level. How romantic. Does he mention the other 3 women he's sleeping with, or does he let you pretend you're special? Valeria's face went white. You're lying. Am I? Ask him about the brunette in Prague, or the blonde in Singapore, or... Serafina tilted her head. Actually, don't ask. I'm sure he appreciates your willingness to live in denial, makes you more manageable. You fucking... Ladies, a new voice cut between them. Dmitri, Lucien's enforcer, his massive frame appearing like a wall. Boss wants everyone in their seats. Show's starting soon. Valeria shot Serafina a look of pure hatred, then stalked away toward the stage. Dmitri watched her go, then turned to Serafina. You okay, Mrs. Draven? Perfect. She met his eyes. Why wouldn't I be? He studied her for a long moment. Dmitri wasn't stupid. Violence had been his profession for 30 years, and you didn't survive that long without learning to read people. You look different tonight. I'm wearing red. It's not the dress. He frowned, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. You look like you're going to war. Serafina smiled. Maybe I am. Cut. The lights dimmed. Conversations faded to whispers, then silence. On the stage at the far end of the ballroom, a podium stood under a single spotlight, waiting. Serafina found her seat, front row, right side, exactly where Lucien had told her to sit, so the cameras would capture his beautiful wife watching him claim victory. Around her, the most dangerous people in the world settled into chairs that cost more than cars, waiting for the show. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it discreetly. Another text from Geneva. Media release scheduled for 8:15 p.m. All major financial networks will have the story simultaneously. Are you certain you want to proceed? Serafina typed back, "Proceed." The lights went completely dark. Then music. Something orchestral and overblown, the kind of dramatic entrance music dictators used. A spotlight hit the stage. Lucien Draven walked out to applause. He wore a tuxedo that had been custom-made in Milan, his hair perfectly styled, his smile the kind that made people forget he'd ordered executions before breakfast. He moved like he owned not just the room, but the air inside it, the ground beneath it, the very concept of space itself. Serafina watched him and felt nothing. That was new. That was different. For 5 years, seeing Lucien had triggered something. Love in the beginning, then hurt, then anger, then resignation. But now, watching him bask in applause from murderers and monsters, she felt the same thing she'd feel watching a stranger. He wasn't her husband. He was a problem she was about to solve. "Thank you." Lucien's voice carried across the room without microphone assistance. He'd trained himself to project, to command attention through sheer force of presence. "Thank you all for being here tonight. For those who don't know me, though I suspect everyone in this room knows exactly who I am, my name is Lucien Draven, and tonight we're here to celebrate the future." More applause. Serafina's hand stayed folded in her lap. "For 2 years," Lucien continued, "I've been working toward a singular goal. The Constantine Energy Cartel controls 70% of privatized energy infrastructure across Eastern Europe. Billions in revenue, unlimited potential, and until now, utterly mismanaged by people who confused legacy with competence." Scattered laughter. Somewhere in the room, Victor Constantine was sitting through this, listening to Lucien describe his failure. Serafina wondered if he knew yet, if the lawyers had told him the deal was dead. "Tonight," Lucien said, his smile widening, "that changes. Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that after extensive negotiations, the Constantine cartel is—" "Mr. Draven," a voice from the back of the room. People turned. A man in a gray suit, one of Victor's lawyers, stood up, his face pale. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development." The room went silent. Lucien's smile didn't change, but Serafina saw his jaw tighten. "This isn't the time for developments, Michael. We'll discuss—" "You need to hear this now." The lawyer was sweating. "The deal, the controlling share of the cartel, it's already been sold." Confusion rippled through the audience. Lucien's hand gripped the podium edge. "What are you talking about? We have contracts. The contracts are void." Another man stood. This one Serafina recognized as one of Victor's partners, a Ukrainian oligarch named Petrov. "The majority share was purchased 3 hours ago through a series of shell corporations. Victor doesn't own enough to sell to you anymore. None of us do." The silence changed quality. Became dangerous. Lucien's voice went very quiet. "Who bought it?" "We don't know. The sale went through anonymous holding companies, offshore accounts, layers of who bought it. A syndicate called Serpent Holdings. That's all we have. Everything else is buried under enough legal protection that it'll take months to—" "Serpent Holdings." Lucien repeated the words like they tasted wrong. "Never heard of them. Neither had we." Petrov's voice shook slightly. "But they own 43% of the cartel now, more than anyone else, which means your deal is dead, Mr. Draven. The cartel belongs to someone else." The ballroom erupted, people shouting questions, demanding answers, chairs scraping back as men stood up. Lucien just stood there at the podium, his face blank, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. Serafina watched it all from her front row seat, her expression calm. On stage, Lucien's eyes scanned the crowd, looking for answers, looking for someone to blame. His gaze passed over her once, dismissive, already moving to the next face. Then it snapped back. He stared at her, really looked at her, at the crimson dress, at the serpent necklace coiled around her throat. Serpent. Understanding hit him like a freight train. Serafina smiled. The ballroom descended into chaos. Men shouted into phones, demanding information. Victor's people clustered together, arguing in Russian. Lucien's soldiers looked to him for direction, but their boss just stood frozen at the podium, staring at his wife like she'd materialized from another dimension. Serafina stood up, smoothed her dress, walked toward the stage. People got out of her way. She climbed the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. The spotlight hit her, and for a moment she was blinded by it. Then her eyes adjusted, and she could see the entire room. 300 faces turned toward her, confusion written across all of them. She stepped up to the microphone. Lucien stood 3 feet away, his mouth slightly open, his brain clearly trying to process information that didn't make sense. "Hello, everyone," Serafina's voice carried across the room. "I apologize for the interruption. I know you all came here tonight expecting Lucien to announce his acquisition of the Constantine cartel. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen." Murmurs, whispers. Lucien found his voice. "Serafina, what the fuck are you?" "The cartel belongs to me now." She said it simply, matter-of-factly, the way you'd announce the weather. "I purchased controlling interest through Serpent Holdings, my company, using funds from my personal inheritance. The transaction finalized approximately 90 minutes ago. All documentation is legally binding and internationally recognized." The room exploded, people shouting, chairs falling over. Lucien grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You're lying. This is some kind of—" "I'm not lying." Serafina pulled her arm free, her voice never rising. "Check with your lawyers. Check with Victor's people. Check with anyone you want. I own 43% of the Constantine Energy cartel. You own nothing." "That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You don't have the connections, the knowledge, the what, Lucien? The intelligence? The capability?" She turned to face him fully. "You're right. The stupid little wife who sits in the corner and looks pretty couldn't possibly pull this off. Except she did." His face went through several colors. "When? How long have you—" "6 months." Serafina's smile was cold. "I've been building this for 6 months. While you were busy with Valeria and your other distractions, while you were celebrating victories you hadn't won yet, I was doing what you should have done, moving quietly, moving carefully, moving like someone who understands that real power doesn't announce itself." Lucien's hand shot out, grabbed her throat, not hard enough to choke, but enough to make a point. Around them, people gasped. Dmitri moved forward, then stopped, clearly unsure whose side he was on. "You stole from me," Lucien hissed, his face inches from hers. "You used my connections, my influence, my—" "I used nothing of yours." Serafina's voice stayed level despite the hand on her throat. "I used my inheritance, my lawyers, my intelligence. Everything I did was legal, legitimate, and completely independent of you. You can check. You can investigate. You won't find a single thing that ties this to you or your organization." "Then how did you know about the cartel? How did you know about Victor, about the timing, about—" "I listened." She met his eyes. "For 5 years, I sat in rooms while you conducted business. I listened to every meeting, every phone call, every drunken conversation with your soldiers. You thought I was decoration, so you didn't bother being careful. You told me everything I needed to know by forgetting I could hear you." His grip tightened. "You betrayed me." "No." Serafina's voice went hard. "You betrayed yourself. You married me, swore vows, promised partnership. Then you treated me like furniture. You fucked your way through half the city while I played the perfect wife. You looked at me with contempt while I smiled and nodded and pretended not to notice. So don't talk to me about betrayal, Lucien. You're the expert." Someone in the crowd started clapping, slowly, deliberately. Lucien released Serafina's throat and spun around. Valeria stood in the second row, her face a mask of pure fury, but she wasn't the one clapping. It was an older man. Silver-haired, expensive suit, face like carved granite. Giovanni Marchetti. "Brava," he said, his accent thick. "That took balls, Mrs. Draven. Real balls." Other people joined in. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that Lucien understood the room had split. Some of them were impressed. Some of them were laughing at him. Lucien turned back to Serafina, and for the first time in 5 years she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of her. Fear of what she represented. Fear that the world he'd built on absolute control was fracturing in real time. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, it is. Serafina stepped back, putting distance between them. The cartel is mine, the deal is dead. And unless you want to make this worse, you'll accept that and move on. Make this worse? Lucien laughed, but it sounded broken. How could this possibly be worse? Serafina pulled her phone from her clutch, checked the time. In about 30 seconds, every major financial news network is going to run a story about the Constantine cartel acquisition. They're going to name Serpent Holdings as the new majority owner, and they're going to include a quote from me, Serafina Vale, not Serafina Draven, explaining my vision for the company's future. You used your maiden name. Of course I did. Why would I want my success associated with you? The phone buzzed, then another. Then a dozen phones around the room all started buzzing simultaneously as news alerts hit. People pulled out devices, started reading, started understanding that this wasn't a private humiliation. This was public. This was international. This was permanent. Lucien's face went gray. You destroyed me, he whispered. No. Serafina moved toward the stage steps. I freed myself. There's a difference. You destroyed yourself by being so arrogant, so certain of your own power, that you never bothered to see the threat right in front of you. She descended the steps. The crowd parted. People stared at her with a mix of fear, respect, and something that looked like hunger. She was halfway to the exit when Lucien's voice rang out across the ballroom. If you leave this room, you're dead. Serafina stopped, turned. Lucien stood at the edge of the stage, his hand inside his jacket. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. Dmitri moved closer to Serafina. So did two other men, Marco and another lieutenant named Gregor. They formed a loose triangle around her, blocking Lucien's sight line. Boss, Dmitri said carefully, think about this. Get out of my way. She's still your wife. You pull that trigger, there's consequences you can't control. She's a traitor. Lucien's voice shook. She stabbed me in the back. She humiliated me in front of everyone who matters. I'm supposed to just let that go? You're supposed to be smart. Marco's voice was steady. You shoot her. You don't get the cartel back. You just become the man who murdered his wife in front of 300 witnesses. That's not power, boss. That's suicide. The room held its breath. Serafina stood very still, watching Lucien's face cycle through rage, humiliation, and finally something worse. The realization that his own men were choosing her. Not because they loved her, because they respected power more than loyalty. And right now, in this room, she had more power than he did. Lucien's hand came out of his jacket, empty. Get out, he said to Serafina. Get out before I change my mind. She didn't run, didn't hurry. Just turned and walked toward the exit with her head high, the serpent necklace catching light with every step. Behind her, she heard Lucien's voice, quieter now, defeated. This isn't over. You hear me, Serafina? This isn't fucking over. She paused at the door, looked back one last time. Yes, Lucien, it is. Then she walked out into the night, leaving her husband standing in the ruins of his empire, and didn't look back. The limousine was waiting. Serafina collapsed into the back seat, her hands finally shaking, adrenaline flooding her system now that the performance was over. The driver pulled away from the hotel, and she watched it recede in the rear window, that monument to Lucien's excess, now the site of his greatest humiliation. Her phone rang. Geneva. Mrs. Draven, I saw the news coverage. It's everywhere. Financial networks, social media, international press. You're the story of the night. Good. I should warn you, Mr. Draven has considerable resources. He can make your life very difficult going forward. Legal challenges, financial pressure, possibly. He can try. Serafina's voice was steady again. But I was careful. Every transaction is clean. Every document is legitimate. He has no legal recourse. Legal isn't the same as safe. I know. She closed her eyes. But I'm done being safe. Safe got me 5 years in a cage. I'll take dangerous over that any day. The lawyer sighed. What do you want to do with the cartel? You have majority control, but running an international energy conglomerate isn't... I'm not running it. I'm restructuring it. Serafina opened her eyes, staring out at the city lights flowing past. clean energy initiatives, legitimate business practices, actual governance. I'm going to take everything Lucian wanted and turn it into something that actually matters. That's ambitious. That's the point. The call ended. Serafina sat in silence as the limousine navigated through traffic. Around her, the city pulsed with life, people living normal lives, worrying about normal things, never knowing that above them, in penthouses and private clubs, monsters wore human faces and called it civilization. She'd been one of those people once, normal, naive, believing in love. That woman was dead. The woman who'd replaced her was something else entirely. The limousine pulled up to a boutique hotel in a neighborhood Lucien would never think to look. Serafina had booked it 3 months ago, using cash under a false name. She'd prepared for this night with the same precision she'd used for the cartel acquisition. She walked into the lobby, checked in, took the elevator to the 12th floor. The room was small, simple, nothing like the penthouse she'd left behind. But it was hers, completely hers. Serafina set her clutch on the dresser, removed the serpent necklace, unzipped the crimson dress and let it fall to the floor. She stood there in the mirror, looking at herself, at the woman who'd just destroyed a mafia boss in front of his entire world. She should feel triumphant. She should feel victorious. Instead, she just felt tired and alone and terrified that Lucien would find a way to make her pay. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You made a powerful enemy tonight. I can help, or I can stay out of it. Your choice. GM Giovanni Marchetti." Serafina stared at the message. An alliance with the Marchetti family would give her protection, resources, power to counter whatever Lucien threw at her next. It would also put her right back in the world she'd just escaped. She set the phone down without answering. Tomorrow, she'd figure out her next move. Tomorrow, she'd build the future she'd fought for. Tonight, she just wanted to sleep. Serafina turned off the lights and lay down on the bed, still wearing her jewelry, her body finally crashing from the adrenaline. Through the window, she could see the city stretching toward infinity, all those lights and lives and possibilities. Somewhere out there, Lucien was planning his revenge. Somewhere out there, enemies she hadn't even made yet were learning her name. Somewhere out there, the consequences of tonight were multiplying like cancer cells. But for now, in this small room that belonged only to her, Serafina allowed herself one moment of peace. She'd burned down her old life. Now she just had to survive the aftermath. Her eyes closed, and in the darkness behind them, she saw Lucien's face as he'd realized what she'd done. That moment of pure, absolute shock when his world had shattered. She smiled. Then sleep took her under, pulling her down into dreams where she was still running, still fighting, still trying to escape a cage that kept rebuilding itself no matter how many times she broke free. Serafina woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the nightstand. Not the gentle buzz of a text message, the angry, persistent rattle of an incoming call. She opened her eyes to unfamiliar darkness, her brain taking 3 seconds to remember where she was. Boutique hotel, 12th floor, hiding from the man she'd just destroyed. The phone screen glowed, 4:17 in the morning. Dimitri's name flashed across the display. She answered. "What? You need to get out of there." His voice was low, urgent. "Right now. Don't pack. Don't think. Just move." Serafina sat up, adrenaline slamming through her bloodstream. "What happened?" "Lucien knows where you are. I don't know how, but he knows. He's got 8 men on the way. You've got maybe 10 minutes. How did he Does it matter? Move, Mrs. Draven. Now." The line went dead. Serafina was already out of bed, grabbing her dress from the floor, shoving her feet into shoes that weren't made for running. Her hands shook as she pulled the crimson fabric over her head. The serpent necklace was still on the dresser. She grabbed it, stuffed it into her clutch along with her phone and wallet. No time for anything else. She opened the hotel room door, looked both ways down the hallway. Empty. The emergency exit sign glowed red at the far end. She moved toward it, her heels silent on the carpet, her heart hammering against her ribs. The stairwell door opened before she reached it. A man stepped through. Not one of Lucien's soldiers. Someone she'd never seen before. Late 30s, athletic build, expensive suit, eyes that assessed her like a rifle scope finding its target. "Mrs. Draven." His accent was slight, Eastern European. "Please come with me." "I don't think so." Serafina reversed direction, moving back toward her room. Two more men emerged from the elevator. Same build, same look. Professional killers trying to pass for hotel security. She was trapped. The first man raised his hands, palms out. "We're not here to hurt you. Mr. Marsetti sent us. He said you might need extraction." Giovanni. The text message from last night. "How did Marsetti know I'd need—" "He knows Lucien Draven. He knows what happens to people who embarrass him." The man gestured toward the stairwell. "We have a car. 3 minutes and you're gone. Or you can wait here and see what Lucien's people do when they arrive. Your choice." Serafina's mind raced through options. Trust Marsetti's people. Trust her own ability to disappear. Stay and fight men who'd been killing professionally since before she was born. From somewhere below, she heard the elevator ding. Fuck it. She moved toward the stairwell. "Let's go." They descended 12 floors at a run. Serafina's heels clattered on concrete until one of Marchetti's men, the youngest, maybe 25, said, "The shoes, lose them." She kicked them off without stopping. Her bare feet slapped against cold stairs, and she had the hysterical thought that this was definitely not how billionaire energy moguls were supposed to make their exit. They hit the ground floor. The man in front cracked the door, checked the lobby. "Clear. Move." They crossed the lobby in 15 seconds. A black Mercedes SUV idled at the curb, driver already behind the wheel. Serafina dove into the back seat. The door slammed. The vehicle pulled away from the hotel with the kind of smooth acceleration that suggested the driver had done this before. Through the rear window, Serafina watched 3 more SUVs pull up to the hotel entrance. Men in dark clothes poured out, moving with military precision toward the doors. Lucien's people. 30 seconds later, and they would have had her. "Where are we going?" Serafina asked. The man in the passenger seat, the one who'd found her in the hallway, turned around. "Somewhere safe. Mr. Marsetti will explain." "I didn't ask to be rescued." "No, but you needed it anyway." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to the consequences, Mrs. Draven. Wotis." The Marsetti estate sat on 200 acres north of the city, hidden behind walls that looked decorative but could probably withstand mortar fire. The Mercedes passed through 2 security checkpoints before pulling up to a house that was somehow both modern and ancient, glass and steel grafted onto stone that had been standing for a century. Giovanni Marchetti waited on the front steps, wearing a bathrobe and slippers like this was a social call at 4:30 in the morning. "Serafina." He descended the steps as she climbed out of the SUV. "Forgive the informal welcome. When Dmitri called to warn me about Lucien's plans, I thought it best to move quickly." "Dmitri called you?" "An hour ago. He's been my informant inside Lucien's organization for 6 months." Giovanni smiled at her expression. "You're not the only one who's been planning, my dear. Come inside, we have much to discuss." The house interior was warmer than she'd expected. Wood paneling, leather furniture, the kind of understated wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Giovanni led her to a study lined with books that looked actually read, not purchased by the yard for decoration. He poured 2 glasses of something amber, handed her one. "Drink. You look like you need it." Serafina drank. Cognac. Expensive enough that it went down smooth. "Why did you help me?" "Because you impressed me." Giovanni settled into a chair across from her. "What you did last night at the gala, that took courage, intelligence, the kind of ruthlessness this business respects. Lucien married you thinking you were a trophy. Instead, he married a viper. That's delicious irony. It's also going to get me killed. Only if you face him alone." Giovanni leaned forward. "This is why I'm offering you an alliance, my family's protection in exchange for access to the Constantine cartel's energy infrastructure. We help each other. We both survive. We both profit." Serafina studied his face. Giovanni Marchetti was 70 years old and had been in the Mafia since before her parents were born. He didn't make offers out of kindness. "What's the real price?" she asked. "Smart girl." Giovanni smiled. "The real price is loyalty. You work with my family, you don't work against us, you share information, you coordinate major moves, you become part of our network instead of trying to operate independently. So I escape Lucien's cage and walk into yours. My cage is considerably larger, and the door isn't locked." Giovanni sipped his cognac. "I'm not Lucien, Serafina. I don't need to own people. I just need them to be useful." Are you useful? The question hung in the air. Serafina thought about the hotel room, about Lucien's men arriving 30 seconds after she'd left, about having nowhere to go, no one to trust, nothing but money that couldn't buy safety from a man who controlled half the city's criminal infrastructure. What do you want me to do? She asked. First, survive. Second, legitimize the cartel. Turn it into something that generates clean money instead of drawing regulatory attention. Third, Giovanni's smile widened. Help me destroy Lucien Draven so completely that no one will remember his name in 5 years. You want to go to war with him. I want to erase him. There's a difference. Giovanni set down his glass. Lucien's been a problem for a long time. Arrogant, sloppy, drawing attention to operations that work better in shadows. Last night you humiliated him in front of the entire underworld. That makes him desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, and I intend to capitalize on every single one. Serafina's head spun. This was bigger than she'd planned, bigger than she'd wanted. She'd just wanted freedom. Now she was being offered a weapon. I need time to think. You don't have time. Giovanni stood, walked to the window. Dawn was starting to gray the horizon. Lucien's already moving. Dimitri says he's calling in favors, activating assets, preparing to come after you with everything he has. You can face that alone and die. Or you can face it with my family's resources and maybe survive long enough to actually use that cartel acquisition for something. Why do you care if I survive? Giovanni turned back to her. Because you remind me of my daughter. She had your fire, your intelligence, your absolute refusal to accept the role men tried to force on her. His expression darkened. Lucien killed her 7 years ago, made it look like an accident. I've been waiting for the right moment to repay that debt ever since. The room went very quiet. I didn't know, Serafina said. No one did. Lucien's very good at covering his tracks. Giovanni's voice was soft, dangerous. But I know. And now you've given me the perfect opportunity to destroy him using his own arrogance against him. So yes, Serafina, I care if you survive, because you're the knife I'm going to use to cut his throat. Serafina looked at this old man with his bathrobe and his dead daughter and his 7-year grudge, and understood that she'd stepped into something far more complex than she'd imagined. But what choice did she have? All right, she said, I'm in. Giovanni smiled. Excellent. Now let's discuss how we're going to... The window exploded. Glass shattered inward. Giovanni stumbled back. Serafina hit the floor on instinct, her hands covering her head as gunfire erupted from somewhere outside. Automatic weapons. Multiple shooters. The study walls disintegrated as bullets chewed through wood and plaster. Someone grabbed Serafina's arm, dragged her toward the door. One of Marsetti's men, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. Move! Go! They crawled through the doorway into the hallway. More gunfire, shouting in Italian. The house alarm shrieking. Giovanni appeared beside her, no longer wearing the bathrobe. He had a pistol in one hand and a phone in the other. South wing, panic room, now. They ran. Serafina's bare feet left bloody prints on marble floors. Behind them, the front door exploded inward. Men in tactical gear poured through, firing at anything that moved. This wasn't Lucien's usual approach. This was military, coordinated, professional. This was an execution squad. Giovanni shoved Serafina through a doorway. Steel door concealed in the wall. Beyond it, a reinforced room with monitors showing every angle of the estate. On the screens, Serafina watched at least 20 armed men systematically clearing the house. How did they find me? She gasped. Giovanni was already on his phone, barking orders in Italian. He ended the call and turned to her, his face grim. Your phone. They must have tracked it. I turned off location services. Lucien has connections in NSA, in intelligence agencies across 3 continents. If he wanted to find you badly enough, he could. Giovanni pointed at the monitors. And he wanted to find you very badly. On screen, Lucien's men were executing Marchetti's guards. No hesitation, no mercy. Just systematic murder. Serafina watched a man she'd been drinking cognac with 20 minutes ago take 3 bullets to the chest and go down. We're trapped, she said. Not trapped. Protected. Giovanni gestured at the monitors. This room can withstand sustained assault for 72 hours. My people are already mobilizing. Lucien made a mistake coming here. He just declared war on the Marsetti family. He's willing to risk that to kill me? Apparently. Giovanni's expression was unreadable. You must have hurt him worse than I thought. They sat in that reinforced room and watched on monitors as Lucien's assault team searched the estate. Serafina counted 23 men, all of them armed with military-grade weapons, all of them moving like they'd trained together. This wasn't improvised revenge. This was planned, coordinated, which meant Lucien had been preparing for this possibility before she'd even revealed the cartel acquisition. The thought sent ice down her spine. He knew, she whispered. Somehow, he knew what I was planning. Giovanni looked at her sharply. What? This level of response doesn't happen in 6 hours. This took days to organize, maybe weeks. Serafina's mind raced. Which means he knew about the cartel acquisition before I announced it. He was just waiting to see if I'd actually go through with it. If he knew, why didn't he stop you? Because stopping me would have shown his hand. This way, I reveal myself, and he gets to play the victim while he murders me. Serafina laughed, but it sounded broken. I thought I was being clever. I thought I was invisible, but he was watching me the whole time. On the monitors, Lucien's men were withdrawing. They'd searched the estate, killed everyone they'd found, and were now pulling back to their vehicles. The assault had lasted 12 minutes. Giovanni watched them leave, his expression carved from stone. They'll be back. This was just reconnaissance. Next time they'll bring enough firepower to breach this room. So what do? We evacuate. I have safe houses across 6 countries. We move you somewhere Lucien can't reach. Giovanni turned to her. But first, you need to understand something. The war just started, and wars have casualties. Are you prepared for that? Serafina thought about the bodies on the monitors, about men who died because she'd slept in Giovanni's house for 6 hours, about the price other people were paying for her freedom. I don't have a choice, do I? No, Giovanni said. You don't. They left the estate in an armored convoy, 4 SUVs moving in formation toward a private airfield 50 miles away. Serafina sat in the second vehicle, sandwiched between 2 of Marchetti's soldiers, watching the sunrise paint the sky the same color as her dress. Her phone buzzed. She'd been told to throw it away, but she'd kept it. Stupid, maybe. But it was her last connection to the life she'd known. A text from an unknown number. You should have taken the deal when I offered it. Now it's too late. L. Lucien. Serafina stared at the message, her stomach twisting. Another text. I gave you everything. A home, a name, protection, and you threw it in my face. Then another. Did you really think I wouldn't know? That I wouldn't see what you were building? And another. I watched you for 6 months. Watched you meet with lawyers. Watched you build your little empire. I could have stopped you any time, but I wanted to see how far you'd go. Serafina's hands shook. Final text. You wanted freedom? Congratulations. You're free. Free to run. Free to hide. Free to spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, knowing I'm coming. Enjoy it, Kara. You earned it. The phone went dark. Serafina looked up to find both soldiers staring at her. You all right, Mrs. Draven? The one on her left asked. He's been watching me the whole time, she said. Every move I made, every meeting, every transaction, he knew. The soldiers exchanged glances. Then why didn't he stop you? The one on her right asked. Because he wanted me to think I'd won. Serafina's voice came out hollow. He wanted me to feel powerful right before he took it all away. This isn't about the cartel. This is about proving he owns me no matter what I do. The convoy pulled through the airfield gates. A private jet waited on the tarmac, engines already running. Giovanni emerged from the lead vehicle, gesturing for Serafina to follow. We're going to Malta. I have a compound there. Secure. Isolated. You'll be safe while we figure out our next move. Serafina climbed out of the SUV. The morning air was cold against her skin. She still wore the crimson dress, still had the serpent necklace in her clutch, still looked like she was dressed for a party that had ended in blood. What if there is no next move? She asked. What if Lucien's already won? He hasn't won. He's just shown his hand. Giovanni started toward the jet. Come, we'll regroup and... The first vehicle in the convoy exploded. The blast threw Serafina backward. She hit the tarmac hard, her ears ringing, her vision white. Heat washed over her, screaming, more explosions. Gunfire. Someone grabbed her, dragged her behind one of the remaining SUVs. She couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched whine, couldn't see anything except smoke and flames. Giovanni's face appeared in front of her, his mouth moving, no sound reaching her. Then her hearing came back in a rush. In the perimeter. How did they breach the perimeter? Gunfire from multiple directions. Marchetti's men returning fire. The jet's engines screaming as the pilot tried to take off. A rocket-propelled grenade hit the jet's wing. The explosion turned the aircraft into a fireball. They weren't getting out by air. Giovanni grabbed Serafina's face, forced her to look at him. There's a backup plan. Emergency vehicle on the far side of the airfield. Can you run? I don't know. Figure it out, now! He hauled her to her feet. They ran, staying low, using the burning vehicles as cover. Around them, the battle turned into chaos. Marchetti's soldiers dying. Lucien's assault team advancing, the sound of it all like the end of the world. They reached the far side of the airfield. A motorcycle sat there, keys in the ignition. Not armored, not protected, just two wheels and an engine. Take it, Giovanni gasped. Blood stained his shirt. Serafina hadn't even seen him get hit. Go south. There's a town called Rossi's Harbor. Find the church. Ask for Father. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. Giovanni shoved her toward the motorcycle. I'm 70 years old and bleeding internally. I'll slow you down. Go, now, before they... A bullet took him in the shoulder. He spun, went down hard. Serafina screamed. Dove for him. Someone grabbed her from behind, lifted her off her feet. Not one of Marchetti's men, one of Lucien's. She fought, clawed, bit. The man's grip didn't loosen. Got her, he shouted into a radio. Repeat, yeet. We have the target. More hands grabbing her, zip ties cutting into her wrists, a hood pulled over her head, blocking out the light. Serafina heard Giovanni's voice, weak and fading. Run, Serafina, don't let him... A single gunshot. Then silence. They threw her into a vehicle. The engine roared. They were moving, leaving the airfield, leaving the bodies, leaving everything. Serafina lay on the floor of what felt like a van, zip ties cutting into her wrists, the hood suffocating her, and understood with perfect clarity that she'd lost. She'd thought she was playing chess. But Lucien had been playing a different game entirely, and she'd just been captured by a man who had no reason to keep her alive. The van drove for what felt like hours. No one spoke. No one touched her. She just lay there in the darkness, feeling every bump in the road, her mind spiraling through panic and terror and desperate calculations. Finally, the van stopped. Doors opened. Hands grabbed her, pulled her out. Her bare feet hit concrete. Someone cut the zip ties, pulled off the hood. Serafina blinked against sudden light. She was in a warehouse, empty, abandoned, the kind of place where people disappeared. And standing in front of her, wearing the same tuxedo from last night, looking like he hadn't slept at all, was Lucien. He smiled. Hello, Cara. We need to talk. The warehouse smelled like rust and old blood. Serafina's bare feet stuck to the concrete floor, something wet, something she didn't want to identify. Her wrists ached where the zip ties had cut in. Her ears still rang from the explosions. But none of that mattered compared to the man standing 10 feet away, looking at her like she was a problem he was about to solve permanently. Lucien hadn't changed clothes since the gala. His tuxedo was rumpled now, the bow tie gone, the shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked tired. Human. That made him more dangerous, not less. You're wondering if I'm going to kill you, he said. His voice echoed in the empty space. The answer is, I haven't decided yet. Serafina's throat was dry. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Lucien walked closer, his shoes clicking on concrete. 6 months. You spent 6 months building your little empire, thinking you were invisible. Do you want to know when I first noticed? She found her voice. When? The 3rd week. You met with a lawyer in Geneva, used a fake name, paid cash, thought you were being careful. Lucien stopped 3 feet away. But the hotel you stayed in, I own it. The restaurant where you had lunch, mine. The car service you used, also mine. You moved through my world, Serafina. You just didn't know it was mine. The words hit like physical blows. You're lying. Am I? Then explain how I knew about every meeting, every transaction, every shell corporation you established. Lucien pulled out his phone, swiped through it, held it up. See this? Complete financial breakdown of Serpent Holdings. Every account, every transfer, every lawyer you hired. I've had it for 4 months. Serafina stared at the screen, at her entire plan, laid out in forensic detail. If you knew, she whispered, why didn't you stop me? Because I wanted to see what you'd do. Lucien pocketed the phone. I wanted to see if my sweet, obedient wife actually had the spine to go through with it. And you did. You stood on that stage and destroyed me in front of everyone who matters. That took courage. His smile was cold. Stupid courage, but courage nonetheless. So you decided to kill everyone around me instead. I decided to teach you a lesson about consequences. Lucien gestured at the warehouse. Martetti's dead. His men are dead. Your Geneva lawyer? Dead. The accountant you hired in the Caymans? Dead. Everyone who helped you build your little syndicate is gone, Serafina. Everyone except you. Her legs threatened to give out. She locked her knees, refusing to fall. Giovanni had nothing to do with this. Giovanni had everything to do with this. He's been trying to undermine me for 7 years. You think he helped you out of kindness? He wanted to use you as a weapon against me. Well, congratulations. You were a very effective weapon, for about 12 hours. Lucien circled her slowly like a shark assessing prey. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign documents transferring Serpent Holdings to me, all of it. The cartel, the accounts, the infrastructure, everything. No. Then I'll kill you and take it anyway. The choice is whether you die now or later. Serafina's mind raced. The warehouse had 2 exits that she could see, both behind Lucien's men. 6 of them, standing in the shadows, armed and watching. No windows, no weapons, no way out. If you kill me, she said carefully, you don't get the cartel. I structured the ownership through trusts with dead man's switches. If I die, everything gets liquidated and donated to about 40 different international charities. You get nothing. Lucien's expression didn't change. You're bluffing. Am I? Check with your lawyers. Check with whoever gave you that financial breakdown. Ask them what happens to Serpent Holdings if I die unexpectedly. She watched his face, saw the flicker of doubt. She wasn't bluffing. She'd set up the dead man switches 3 months ago, paranoid even then that Lucien might find out. The trusts were real. The charities were real. If she died, the cartel would slip through his fingers like water. Lucien pulled out his phone, walked away, speaking in low tones to someone on the other end. His shoulders tensed. Whatever his lawyer was telling him, it wasn't good news. He ended the call, turned back to her. Clever. Paranoid, but clever. I learned from the best. Don't flatter yourself. You're not in my league. Lucien moved closer. But you're right. I can't kill you. Not without losing everything you built. So here's the revised plan. You sign over 51% of Serpent Holdings, enough to give me controlling interest. You keep the rest, keep your dead man switches, keep breathing. We both walk away with something. And I'm supposed to trust you to honor that deal? You're supposed to understand you don't have a choice. Lucien grabbed her face, his fingers digging into her jaw. I've killed 23 people in the last 6 hours because of you. I've started a war with the Marchetti family. I've exposed operations that were supposed to stay buried. All of it because you decided to play power games instead of accepting your role. So yes, Serafina, you're going to sign those papers, and then you're going to disappear. Because if I ever see your face again, dead man switches or not, I will find a way to make you suffer that doesn't involve death. His breath was hot against her face, his grip painful enough to leave bruises. And in his eyes, she saw something worse than anger. Hurt. Actual genuine hurt underneath all the rage and violence. He'd loved her once, in his broken, possessive way. And she'd destroyed that. The realization didn't make her feel guilty. It made her feel powerful. Let go of me, she said quietly. Sign the papers. Let go. His grip tightened. For a moment she thought he might snap her neck anyway. Consequences be damned. Then he released her, shoving her backward. She stumbled, caught herself. "The papers are in my car," Lucien said. "You sign them. I verify the transfer with my lawyers. Then you walk out of here and we never see each other again. That's the deal. And if I refuse, then we both lose. The cartel gets liquidated. You die. I get nothing. Mutually assured destruction." Lucien smiled. "But you're too smart for that. You didn't spend 6 months building an empire just to watch it burn. You'll take 50% over 0%. You'll sign." He was right. She knew he was right. 50% of the Constantine cartel was still worth billions, still gave her freedom, still meant she'd won something. But it also meant Lucien won. Meant he got control. Meant everything she'd done would end with him standing over her, proving she'd never really escaped. Serafina looked at him. At this man she'd married 7 years ago when she'd been stupid enough to believe in love. At the monster he'd always been, hidden beneath charm and power and the kind of confidence that made people ignore red flags the size of buildings. "No," she said. Lucien blinked. "What?" "I said no, I'm not signing." "Then you're choosing death." "Maybe. But at least I'm choosing. At least I'm not rolling over and letting you win just because you threaten me." Serafina's voice grew stronger. "You want the cartel? You want to prove you still own me? Then kill me. Pull the trigger. Do it yourself instead of sending your men to do your dirty work. Show me you're actually the monster you pretend to be." The warehouse went silent except for the sound of Lucien's breathing. His hand moved to his jacket. To the gun she knew he kept there. One of his men stepped forward. "Boss, the dead man switches. If she—" "I know what happens," Lucien snapped. His hand stayed on the gun. "She's bluffing. She won't actually let herself die. She wants to live too much." "Do I?" Serafina felt something cold and calm settle over her. "You've spent the last 6 hours killing everyone I connected with, everyone who helped me. What exactly do I have left to live for, Lucien? A life spent running from you, hiding, looking over my shoulder forever? That's not living. That's just dying slowly." She took a step toward him. His men raised their weapons. She ignored them. "You know what I realized?" she continued. "You can't own someone who doesn't fear death. And I'm not afraid anymore. You made me afraid for 5 years. Every day terrified you'd get bored and throw me away. Every night scared you'd stop pretending I mattered. But now?" She laughed. "Now the worst thing you could do to me is kill me. And honestly, that sounds like relief." Lucien's hand trembled on the gun. "You don't mean that. Try me." They stood there staring at each other across 3 feet of warehouse floor. Behind Lucien, his men watched with the kind of fascination usually reserved for car crashes. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Lucien's phone rang. He ignored it. It kept ringing. Finally cursing, he pulled it out. "What?" Serafina watched his face change. Confusion. Then shock. Then something that looked like fear. "When?" he asked. "How many?" A pause. "Jesus Christ, pull everyone back now. I don't care about— Yes, I understand. Do it anyway." He ended the call. Looked at Serafina with an expression she'd never seen before. Panic. "What happened?" she asked. "The feds. They're hitting my warehouses, all of them. Simultaneous raids across 6 states. Lucien's voice came out hollow. "Someone gave them everything. Locations, schedules, records. They know about operations I've kept buried for 15 years. Serafina's heart hammered. "Who? I don't—" Lucien stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Dimitri. It was Dimitri. He was Marsetti's informant, which means he had access to—" Understanding crashed over his face. "You. When you were in my study, when you took pictures of my files, you gave them to Dimitri. You gave them to Marsetti, and Marsetti gave them to the feds. I didn't— Don't lie to me." Lucien grabbed her throat, slamming her against a concrete pillar. "What did you do?" Serafina couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Her vision started to blur. Then gunfire erupted from outside the warehouse. Lucien released her, spinning toward the sound. His men raised their weapons. The warehouse's main door exploded inward. Federal agents poured through. Body armor, automatic weapons, voices screaming commands. FBI, On the ground. Now! Lucien's men opened fire. The warehouse transformed into a war zone. Serafina hit the floor, covering her head, as bullets chewed through the air above her. Someone grabbed her arm. She fought on instinct, then recognized the face. Dmitri. "Come on," he shouted over the gunfire. "Move! You're alive! Later! Move now!" He dragged her toward the back of the warehouse. Behind them, Lucien's voice roared orders. Federal agents advancing, the sound of it all like the world ending. They reached a service door. Dmitri kicked it open. Outside, dawn light and cold air and the sound of helicopter rotors. A black SUV screeched to a stop in front of them. The passenger door flew open. A woman Serafina had never seen before leaned out. "Get in! Now!" Dmitri shoved Serafina toward the vehicle. She stumbled, caught herself, looked back. Through the warehouse door, she could see Lucien. He'd taken cover behind a concrete barrier, returning fire. Blood stained his shoulder. His face was a mask of rage and desperation. Their eyes met across 50 feet of chaos. For 1 second, the world stopped. Then Lucien raised his gun, pointed it at her. Dmitri threw himself in front of Serafina. The bullet meant for her took him in the chest. He went down hard. "No!" Serafina dropped beside him. Blood poured from the wound. Too much blood. "Go," Dmitri gasped. "He'll kill you. Go." The woman from the SUV was suddenly there, grabbing Serafina, hauling her toward the vehicle. "He's gone! You can't help him! Move!" Serafina fought, screamed, but the woman was stronger, trained, and she didn't hesitate. She threw Serafina into the SUV, slammed the door, and the vehicle peeled out. Through the rear window, Serafina watched the warehouse recede, watched federal agents swarm the building, watched Dmitri's body lying motionless on the pavement, watched Lucien emerge with his hands up, surrounded by agents, his empire crumbling in real time. Their eyes met one last time, and Serafina saw something in his face that would haunt her forever. Not anger, not hatred, betrayal. The SUV turned a corner, and he was gone. Serafina collapsed against the seat, her body shaking, adrenaline and shock crashing through her system in waves. The woman driving glanced back at her through the rearview mirror. "You're safe now. We got you out." "Who are you?" "FBI, Special Agent Torres. We've been building a case against Lucien Draven for 3 years. Dmitri was our informant. He said you had evidence we could use. Was he right?" Serafina's mind spun. The photos from Lucien's study, the financial records, the contracts. She'd given them to Dmitri months ago, asking him to keep them safe in case something happened to her. He'd given them to the FBI. He'd been working both sides, protecting her while building a case against Lucien, and now he was dead because of it. "Yeah," Serafina whispered. "I have evidence." "Good, because we're going to need your testimony. Everything you know about Lucien's operations, his network, his connections." Torres navigated through traffic, checking mirrors constantly. "You're going to help us put him away for the rest of his life." "What if I don't want to?" Torres's eyes met hers in the mirror. "Then you don't get witness protection. You don't get a new identity. You don't get safety. You just get to spend the rest of your life running from what's left of Lucien's organization while they hunt you down for revenge. Your choice." It wasn't a choice. It was the illusion of choice. Serafina closed her eyes, felt tears finally come, hot and bitter. She'd wanted freedom. She'd wanted power. She'd wanted to escape. Instead, she'd burned everything to the ground and barely escaped the flames herself. The SUV pulled into an underground parking garage, federal building, security checkpoints, armed agents everywhere. They led her to an elevator, up 20 floors, into a conference room with no windows and cameras in every corner. A man in a suit sat at the table. 50s, graying hair, the kind of face that had seen too much violence. "Mrs. Draven, I'm Assistant Director McKenna. Thank you for cooperating." "I didn't agree to anything yet." "But you will." McKenna gestured to a chair. "Sit. Please. We have a lot to discuss." Serafina sat. Her bare feet left bloody prints on the floor. She still wore the crimson dress. Still looked like she was dressed for a party that had ended in mass murder. McKenna opened a folder, slid photos across the table, crime scenes, bodies, the kind of evidence that sent people to death row. "Lucien Draven is responsible for at least 47 murders we can prove. Probably hundreds more we can't. He controls drug trafficking routes across 3 continents, money laundering operations worth billions, human trafficking, arms deals, everything that makes the world a worse place, he profits from. McKenna looked at her. You lived with this man for 5 years. You know things that can help us lock him away forever. And what do I get? Witness protection, new identity, enough money to start over, a chance to actually be free instead of just pretending. What about the cartel? Serpent Holdings? McKenna's expression hardened. That's going to be complicated. The cartel's tied up in Lucian's criminal enterprise. We'll probably have to freeze the assets during the investigation. Could take years to untangle. So I lose everything anyway. You lose money, you gain your life. Seems like a fair trade. Serafina laughed. It sounded hysterical even to her own ears. I spent 6 months building that. 6 months planning, risking everything, and it all comes down to this? A government office and a promise of witness protection? Welcome to reality, Mrs. Draven. Sometimes there are no winners, just survivors. She stared at the photos, at the evidence of Lucian's crimes, at the proof of what she'd always known but had been too afraid to confront. The man she'd married was a monster, and she'd spent 5 years pretending otherwise. What do you need from me? She asked quietly. Everything. Names, dates, locations, financial records, every conversation you overheard, every meeting you attended, every piece of information you have that can help us build an airtight case. McKenna pulled out a recording device. We start now, and we don't stop until we have enough to ensure Lucian Draven never sees daylight again. Serafina looked at that recording device, thought about what it meant, about burning the last bridge, about ensuring Lucien would spend the rest of his life in a cage, the same way he'd kept her in one. She thought about Dimitri bleeding out on pavement because he'd tried to save her, about Giovanni, shot dead at an airfield because he'd offered her protection, about all the people who died because she'd decided to fight back. Before we start, she said, I want to know something. The raid on Lucian's warehouses, the timing. That wasn't coincidence, was it? McKenna smiled. Dimitri gave us the heads up about your situation. Said Lucien had you in a warehouse. We coordinated the raids to create chaos. Give you a chance to escape. It worked. He knew he was going to die. Dimitri, he knew, and he did it anyway. He was a good man in a bad world. He wanted to make sure you survived, wanted to make sure his work meant something. McKenna gestured at the recorder. Honor that. Help us finish what he started. Serafina's hand trembled as she reached for the recording device. This was it, the final choice. The point where she stopped running and started fighting in a different way. She pressed the button. My name is Serafina Vale, she said into the microphone, and I'm going to tell you everything about Lucien Draven. Every crime, every victim, every secret he tried to bury. McKenna leaned forward. Start at the beginning. When did you first realize who Lucien really was? Serafina closed her eyes, opened them, met McKenna's gaze. The day I married him. And she began to talk. 48 hours later, Serafina stood in a safe house on the outskirts of the city, watching news coverage of Lucian's arraignment. He appeared on screen in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, his face expressionless, his lawyers surrounding him like sharks. The charges scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Racketeering, murder, conspiracy, money laundering, trafficking. The list went on for 3 full minutes. The anchor's voice was professionally neutral. Lucien Draven, alleged crime boss, appeared today to face federal charges. Prosecutors say they have testimony from a confidential witness that will... Serafina turned off the TV. Agent Torres sat at the kitchen table, reviewing documents. You did good. Your testimony is solid. McKenna thinks we can get 3 consecutive life sentences minimum. That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you feel safe. Torres looked up. Lucien's organization is fracturing. Half his lieutenants are dead. The other half are cooperating to save themselves. In 6 months, there won't be anything left except wreckage and federal seizures. And the cartel? Still frozen, still complicated, but McKenna says if you cooperate fully, if the trial goes well, they might release some of the assets to you eventually. Could take 5 years, maybe 10, but it's possible. 5 years. 10 years. By then, Serafina would be someone else entirely. New name, new face, maybe. New life in a city where no one knew her history. That should have felt like victory. It felt like dying. Torres's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Lucien's requesting a meeting with you. Says he has information about other players in his organization. Says he'll only talk to you. Serafina's stomach dropped. No, McKenna wants you to consider it. If Lucien gives up his network, we can dismantle the entire operation. No one else has to die. No one else has to... I said no. Serafina, he's playing you. Whatever he says he wants to trade, it's a lie. He just wants to see me, wants to get inside my head one more time, wants to prove he still has power. Serafina's hand shook. Tell McKenna the answer is no. Tell Lucien he can rot in prison without my help. Torres studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll pass it along, but you should know Lucien's not giving up. He's already filed motions, demanding to face his accuser, claiming his rights are being violated. His lawyers are expensive and very good. This is going to be a long fight. How long? Trial probably won't start for 18 months, maybe 2 years. And that's if everything goes smoothly. Torres stood. You need to prepare yourself for that, for seeing him in court, for reliving everything, for having defense attorneys rip your testimony apart in front of cameras. Serafina looked out the safe house window at a neighborhood she didn't know, full of people living normal lives. They had no idea a woman who'd destroyed a crime empire was hiding 3 doors down. I can do it, she said quietly. Whatever it takes. I can survive it. Can you? Torres moved beside her. Because here's the thing nobody tells witnesses. Sometimes surviving is harder than dying. Sometimes the cage you escape just gets replaced with a different cage. And sometimes, she paused. Sometimes you spend so long fighting monsters that you forget how to be anything else. The words hung in the air like smoke. Serafina turned to face her. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to prepare you for what comes next, for what it costs to bring down someone like Luce Draven. Torres's expression softened. You're brave. You're strong. You did something most people wouldn't have the courage to do, but bravery doesn't make you bulletproof, and strength doesn't mean you won't break. Then what does it mean? It means you get to choose how you break, and whether you put yourself back together afterward. Torres left the room. Serafina stood alone at the window, watching the sun set over a life that wasn't hers, in a house that wasn't home, wearing clothes provided by federal agents who saw her as a case number. Her phone, a new one, untraceable, given to her by the FBI, sat on the counter. It only had 3 contacts: Torres, McKenna, emergency services. Everyone else was gone. Dimitri, dead. Giovanni, dead. Her Geneva lawyer, dead. Everyone who'd helped her build her empire had paid the price for her freedom. And Lucien sat in a cell, plotting his next move, proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing about a predator isn't their strength. It's their patience. Serafina picked up the phone, stared at it, thought about calling McKenna, about agreeing to the meeting, about facing Lucien one more time. Not because she wanted to, but because maybe Torres was right. Maybe she'd spent so long fighting that she'd forgotten any other way to exist. Her finger hovered over McKenna's contact. Then she set the phone down. Not yet. Not until she was ready. Outside, night fell over the city. Somewhere out there, Lucien's organization was dying. Somewhere, federal agents were building the case that would bury him forever. Somewhere, justice was slowly, methodically grinding toward conclusion. But in this safe house, in this moment, Serafina was just a woman who'd burned down her entire world and was now standing in the ashes, trying to figure out if she'd won or just chosen a different way to lose. The crimson dress hung in the closet. She'd kept it. Couldn't say why. Maybe as a reminder, maybe as a trophy, maybe as evidence that she'd once been brave enough to walk into a room full of killers and emerge victorious. She touched the fabric, felt the dried blood. Some hers, some Dimitri's, some from people whose names she'd never know. This dress had been armor. Now it was just a costume from a performance that had ended in tragedy. Serafina let it fall back into the darkness of the closet. Tomorrow, McKenna wanted to continue her testimony. Wanted to dig deeper into Lucien's operations. Wanted names and dates and details that would cement the case. Tomorrow, She would become the weapon the FBI needed to destroy what remained of Lucien's empire. Tonight, she was just tired. So tired. She lay down on the bed that wasn't hers, in the house that wasn't home, and closed her eyes, and dreamed of a warehouse where Lucien stood with a gun pointed at her heart, asking the same question over and over. Was it worth it? In the dream, she never answered, because she still didn't know. 18 months crawled past like wounded animals dragging themselves toward death. Serafina watched them go from behind bulletproof glass in safe houses that all looked the same. Bland furniture, neutral walls, windows that faced streets she'd never walked down. The FBI moved her 7 times. Different cities, different names. Always the same suffocating routine. Mornings meant testimony prep. McKenna and his team drilling her on dates, times, conversations. Making her relive 5 years of marriage until the memories stopped feeling like her life and started feeling like evidence tagged and cataloged for court. Afternoons meant watching Lucien's empire collapse in real time. News coverage showed federal seizures, warehouses, shipping companies, restaurants that laundered money through inflated receipts. His network fractured as lieutenants turned on each other, trading testimony for reduced sentences. The organization that had taken him 20 years to build disintegrated in 20 months. Evenings meant sitting alone in rooms that weren't hers, eating food that tasted like cardboard, and wondering if destroying Lucien had been worth destroying herself in the process. The trial date arrived like an execution notice. United States versus Lucien Draven, federal courthouse, media circus, the biggest organized crime prosecution in a decade. Serafina stood in a witness preparation room, wearing a navy suit the FBI had purchased for her. Conservative, forgettable, designed to make her look like a victim instead of a co-conspirator. Agent Torres adjusted Serafina's collar, her movements precise. Remember what we practiced. Answer the questions McKenna asked. Don't elaborate. Don't get emotional. Don't look at Lucien. Torres met her eyes. He's going to try to rattle you. His lawyers are going to make you look like a scorned wife seeking revenge. You stay calm. You stay focused, you tell the truth, and let the jury decide. What if the truth isn't enough? Then we lose. But we've got 47 murders, financial records going back 15 years, and testimony from 12 cooperating witnesses. The truth should be plenty. Torres stepped back. You ready? Serafina looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked professional, composed. Nothing like the woman who'd worn crimson and diamonds and declared war in front of 300 criminals. No, she said. But let's do it anyway. The courtroom was exactly what she'd expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of spectators treating murder trials like entertainment. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but she could see reporters sketching furiously, capturing every detail for the evening news. Lucien sat at the defense table surrounded by 4 lawyers in suits that cost more than cars. He looked different, thinner. His hair had gone gray at the temples. Prison orange had been replaced with a tailored charcoal suit for court appearances, but he still wore handcuffs that connected to a chain around his waist. He looked up as Serafina entered. Their eyes met. She'd prepared for this moment for 18 months, rehearsed staying calm, practiced looking through him instead of at him. But seeing him there, seeing the man she'd loved and hated and feared and fought, broke something loose inside her chest. His expression didn't change. He just watched her walk to the witness stand, his face carved from stone, his eyes tracking every movement. The bailiff swore her in. She placed her hand on a book and promised to tell the truth. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 5 years living a lie with Lucien, and now truth was the weapon she'd use to destroy him. McKenna approached the witness stand. Please state your name for the record. Serafina Vale. And what is your relationship to the defendant? I was married to Lucien Draven for 5 years. Can you tell the jury when you first became aware of Mr. Draven's criminal activities? Serafina looked at the jury. 12 people who'd never lived in her world, never understood what it meant to love a monster. The day I married him. McKenna walked her through it. The gallery opening where they'd met. The courtship that had felt like a fairy tale. The wedding at a private estate with guests whose names appeared on international watch lists. The slow realization that every beautiful thing Lucien had given her was purchased with blood money. She told them about the first time she'd seen him order an execution, about the affairs he'd paraded in front of her, about being treated like decoration while men discussed murders over dinner. The jury listened. Some took notes. Others just stared at her like she was a creature from another planet, someone who'd voluntarily married into hell and then acted surprised when it burned. McKenna asked about specific incidents. About Marco Santoro, found dead in a car trunk after skimming from Lucien's operations. About shipping containers full of weapons that moved through ports Lucien controlled. About the accountant who'd questioned discrepancies and disappeared 3 days later. "And you witnessed Mr. Draven order these actions?" McKenna asked. "I heard him on phone calls. I saw him meet with the people who carried them out. I watched him celebrate when problems were solved permanently." "Did you ever confront him about these activities?" "No." "Why not?" Serafina's hands gripped the witness stand. "Because I was afraid. Because he made it clear what happened to people who betrayed him. Because I was a coward who chose survival over morality." The courtroom went quiet. "Mrs. Vale," McKenna said gently, "would you say you were complicit in Mr. Draven's crimes?" One of Lucian's lawyers shot to his feet. "Objection. Calls for a legal conclusion." The judge nodded. "Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. McKenna. Did you benefit from Mr. Draven's criminal enterprise?" "Yes." Serafina's voice came out hoarse. "I lived in luxury, purchased with blood money. I wore jewelry bought with profits from drugs and weapons. I attended parties with criminals and pretended not to know what they were. I was complicit through silence, through inaction, through being too weak to leave." McKenna let that sit. Let the jury absorb it. Then he asked, "What changed? What made you finally decide to act?" Serafina looked at Lucien. He sat motionless, his expression blank, but she saw tension in his shoulders, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. "I realized I'd rather die free than live as his possession." "Can you elaborate?" "For 5 years, Lucien treated me like property, like something he owned, and I accepted it because I thought that was the price of safety. But eventually, I understood that safety bought through submission isn't safety at all. It's just a slower death." She paused. "So I chose a different path. I built something he couldn't control, and when he tried to take it from me, I fought back." McKenna smiled slightly. "No further questions, Your Honor." The defense attorney stood. His name was Richard Kellerman, and he'd made a career defending people who deserved to rot in prison. He approached the witness stand like a shark circling wounded prey. "Mrs. Vale, or should I call you Mrs. Draven, since you're still legally married to my client?" "I go by Vale now." "Of course you do. It's easier to destroy someone's life when you pretend you were never connected to them, isn't it?" Kellerman's smile was poisonous. "You testified that you were afraid of Mr. Draven, that he made you feel like property, yet you stayed married to him for 5 years. Why?" "I was trapped." "Trapped in a penthouse worth $40 million? Trapped with unlimited credit cards and designer clothes? Trapped attending galas with the world's elite?" Kellerman's voice dripped contempt. "Mrs. Vale, that sounds less like a trap and more like a lifestyle you enjoyed until it was no longer convenient." "You don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly. You married a wealthy, powerful man. You enjoyed the benefits of his wealth. And when you decided you wanted more, when you decided to steal his business opportunities, you manufactured this narrative about being a victim to justify your betrayal." Serafina's hands shook. "That's not true, isn't it? Let's talk about the Constantine cartel. You testified that you built Serpent Holdings using a personal inheritance, but you also admitted you gathered information from Mr. Draven's private files, information you had no legal right to access, information you then used to undermine a business deal he'd been working on for years. That's not the action of a victim, Mrs. Vale. That's corporate espionage. I was protecting myself. By stealing from your husband, by sabotaging his business?" Kellerman leaned against the witness stand. "How much is the Constantine cartel worth, Mrs. Vale?" "I don't know the exact, approximately $4 billion, and you currently own 43% of it. That's roughly $1.7 billion. Quite a windfall for a woman who claims she was just trying to escape. Makes one wonder if this entire prosecution is really just a way to justify theft on a massive scale." McKenna stood. "Objection. Counsel is testifying. Sustained. Mr. Kellerman, ask questions. Kellerman smiled. Mrs. Vale, did you profit from acquiring the Constantine cartel? The assets are frozen pending. Answer the question. Did you personally benefit financially from actions you're now claiming were purely about escape and survival? Serafina's throat felt like broken glass. I would have, if the FBI hadn't seized everything. So your plan was to steal billions from your husband, destroy his business empire, and then live off the proceeds. And we're supposed to believe this was about freedom rather than greed? It was about both. The words came out before she could stop them. Yes, I wanted the money. Yes, I wanted power. Because money and power are the only things that make you safe in that world. Lucien taught me that. He taught me that victims get destroyed and survivors take what they can. So I became a survivor. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Kellerman's smile widened. No further questions, Your Honor. McKenna called her back on redirect, tried to repair the damage, asked questions about Lucian's violence, about the fear she'd lived with, about the impossibility of leaving without resources. But the damage was done. The jury had seen her admit to greed, to ambition, to being something more complex than a simple victim. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge dismissed her. Serafina walked past Lucien's table on her way out. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her go with eyes that promised this wasn't over. Outside the courtroom, McKenna pulled her aside. You did fine. I admitted to stealing from him. You admitted to being human, to having complicated motivations. The jury can handle complexity. McKenna squeezed her shoulder. Go back to the safe house. Rest. We have 12 more witnesses. The case doesn't rest on you alone. But it felt like it did. Serafina returned to the safe house and watched news coverage dissect her testimony. Legal analysts debated whether she was a victim or a co-conspirator. Social media exploded with opinions, half calling her brave, half calling her a gold digger who'd played the victim card to justify theft. Nobody called her what she actually was. A woman who'd made terrible choices, paid terrible prices, and was still trying to figure out if she'd won or just survived. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Witnesses testified about murders, money laundering, drug trafficking, weapons deals. Financial experts explained offshore accounts and shell corporations. FBI agents detailed surveillance that had tracked Lucien's organization for years. Lucien never took the stand. His lawyers argued reasonable doubt, attacked witness credibility, claimed the prosecution had manufactured a case against a legitimate businessman. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Serafina waited in the safe house, unable to eat, unable to sleep, just watching the clock count down to verdict or mistrial or some outcome she couldn't predict. When the call came, Torres drove her to the courthouse in silence. They entered through a side door to avoid cameras, took an elevator to the courtroom floor. McKenna met them outside. They reached a verdict. And? We'll know in 5 minutes. The courtroom felt like a tomb. Every seat filled. Cameras ready outside to capture reactions. Serafina sat in the gallery, surrounded by FBI agents, and watched Lucien enter in handcuffs. He looked across the room at her. This time, she didn't look away. The jury filed in. 12 faces, carefully neutral. The forewoman handed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. The judge read it. His expression didn't change. Will the defendant please rise? Lucien stood. His lawyers stood with him. On the charge of racketeering, how do you find? Guilty. The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for silence. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Marco Santoro, how do you find? Guilty. Charge after charge, guilty, guilty, guilty. 47 counts, 47 guilty verdicts. Lucien's face didn't change. He stood there like stone while his empire's final destruction played out in legal terminology. When the judge finished reading the verdicts, he set a sentencing date for 6 weeks out. Lucien was remanded to custody. Marshals moved to take him away. He stopped them, said something to Kellerman. The lawyer approached the bench. A brief conversation. The judge frowned, then nodded. The defendant has requested a moment to address Mrs. Vale. I'll allow it, but make it brief. Lucien turned to face Serafina across the courtroom. Everyone went silent. Was it worth it? His voice carried across the space between them. Destroying everything we had. Was it worth it, Serafina? She stood slowly. felt every eye in the room on her. We didn't have anything, Lucian. You had everything. I just existed in your orbit. I gave you everything. You gave me a cage. I gave you love. You gave me possession disguised as love. There's a difference. Serafina moved closer, down the aisle, until only the gallery railing separated them. You want to know if it was worth it? Ask me in 20 years. When you're still in prison and I'm actually free. Then I'll tell you if destroying everything was worth it. Lucien's expression cracked. Just for a second, she saw pain there. Real pain underneath the rage and the violence and the ego. I would have died for you, he said quietly. I know, but you were never willing to change for me. And in the end, that's what I needed. Serafina's voice softened. You're a monster, Lucien, but I'm not innocent either. I married you knowing what you were. I stayed because it was easier than leaving. I waited until I had something to gain before I fought back. So we're both guilty. We're both complicit. We both destroyed each other. Then why do you get to walk away? Because I'm willing to live with what I've done. And you're not. The marshals moved in. Lucien didn't resist as they took his arms. He looked at her one last time. This isn't over. Yes, it is. They let him out. The courtroom erupted in noise, reporters shouting questions, spectators reacting, lawyers huddling. Serafina just stood there, watching the door close behind the man she'd married, and felt nothing. That was the strangest part. After 5 years of marriage, 18 months of testimony, 6 weeks of trial, after all of it, she just felt empty. McKenna appeared at her elbow. You all right? I don't know. That's honest. He guided her toward the exit. Sentencing is in 6 weeks. You don't have to attend, but you can if you want. Will it change anything? No, he's getting life without parole, multiple consecutive sentences. He'll die in prison. McKenna paused. But sometimes closure requires witnessing the end. Serafina didn't answer. They exited through the side door. Outside, late afternoon sun painted everything gold. Torres waited by the car. Where to? She asked. The safe house. I need to think. The drive took 40 minutes. Serafina watched the city pass by. People living normal lives, completely unaware that nearby, a woman who'd toppled a criminal empire was wondering if she'd won or just traded one prison for another. At the safe house, McKenna handed her an envelope. Preliminary asset assessment, the frozen serpent holdings accounts. She opened it, read numbers that should have meant something but just felt abstract. The court's releasing 30% of the assets to you. The rest stays frozen pending civil litigation from Lucien's victims. Could take years to sort out. McKenna watched her face. That 30% is approximately $500 million, enough to disappear, to actually start over. $500 million. More money than she'd ever imagined having, more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. And all she could think was, this is what 23 deaths cost. I want to give it away, she said. McKenna blinked. What? The money. I want to donate it, set up a foundation, something that helps women escape domestic violence, something that actually matters. Serafina met his eyes. I don't want to profit from this. I don't want to carry that weight. That's a lot of money to give away. It's blood money. Lucien's blood, Giovanni's blood, Dimitri's blood. Her voice shook. I don't want it. I just want to be free. McKenna studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll have our financial people draw up the paperwork. You can structure it however you want. He left. Torres lingered in the doorway. You sure about this? She asked. No, but I'm sure I can't keep money that costs that many lives. Even if keeping it would make you powerful, would protect you, especially then. Serafina looked out the window at a sunset she'd watched hundreds of times from safe houses across the country. Power protected through blood money isn't power. It's just another cage. Torres smiled slightly. You're either very wise or very stupid. I haven't decided which. Can't it be both? Yeah, it usually is. Incas. 6 weeks later, Serafina sat in the courtroom and listened to the judge sentence Lucien Draven to 23 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. The legal terminology washed over her, years and decades stacking up like bodies in a mass grave. Lucien stood motionless through it all. When the judge finished, he was allowed to make a statement. He turned to face the gallery, to face Serafina. "I built an empire from nothing," he said. His voice was steady, clear. "I created opportunities for people who had none. I protected communities the government ignored. I provided for families who would have starved otherwise. Was I perfect? No. Did I make mistakes? Obviously. But I was more than what this court says I am. I was a man who loved his wife, who tried to give her everything, and she repaid that love with betrayal." He looked directly at Serafina. "You won, Kara. You destroyed me. I hope it brings you the freedom you wanted. I hope every morning you wake up and feel proud of what you've done. Because I'll be thinking about you every day for the rest of my life. Wondering if you ever think about me. Wondering if you ever loved me at all. Or if I was just a mark from the beginning." The courtroom was silent. The judge gavelled. "The defendant will be remanded to federal custody. This court is adjourned." Marshals led Lucien away. He didn't look back. Serafina sat there until the courtroom emptied, until it was just her and Torres in the wooden pews, surrounded by the architecture of justice. "Did you?" Torres asked quietly. "Love him?" "Once. In the beginning, before I understood what he was." Serafina stood, her legs stiff. "But love isn't enough when someone treats you like property. It's not enough to save you. It's not enough to change them." "No, it's not." They walked out together into bright afternoon sun. Cameras waited outside, but Torres steered her away from them, toward a car that would take her back to the safe house for the last time. Because tomorrow, she'd sign the papers releasing the Serpent Holdings money to the foundation. Tomorrow, she'd take a new identity and move to a city she'd chosen herself. Tomorrow, her new life would actually begin. But tonight she was still Serafina Vale, the woman who'd destroyed a mafia boss and survived to tell about it. In the car, her phone buzzed, a message from McKenna. "Foundation paperwork is ready. Lawyers want to call it the Draven Foundation." "Thoughts?" Serafina typed back, "No. Call it the Serpent Foundation, for women who need venom to survive." McKenna's response came quickly. "Perfect." She set the phone down and watched the city pass by one last time. This place had been her prison and her battlefield. She'd loved and lost and fought and bled here. Now she was leaving. The thought should have felt triumphant. It just felt quiet. Torres glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You okay?" "I'm tired." "That's not the same thing." "No, it's not." Serafina closed her eyes. "Ask me again in a year. Maybe by then I'll know if I'm okay." "Fair enough." They drove in silence. The safe house appeared ahead, one last night in temporary shelter, before tomorrow's permanent escape. Serafina thought about Lucien in a cell, counting days that would never end. About the families of the men he'd killed, finally seeing something resembling justice. About Dimitri and Giovanni and all the others who'd died so she could sit in this car, breathing free air. The price had been catastrophic. The victory felt hollow. But she was alive. That had to count for something. 1 year later, Serafina stood on a beach she'd never seen before, in a country whose language she was still learning, watching waves crash against rocks that had been there for millennia. Her new name was Elena Morrison. Her new life was small, quiet, deliberately unremarkable. She taught English at a language school, rented a cottage that overlooked the ocean, spent evenings reading books that had nothing to do with crime or power or empires built on blood. The Serpent Foundation had launched 6 months ago. It operated shelters in 12 cities, providing resources for women escaping violent relationships. Legal aid, housing, job training, everything Serafina had needed and never had access to during those 5 years with Lucien. She'd met some of the women it helped, heard their stories, seen herself reflected in their eyes, that particular kind of fear that came from loving someone dangerous. It didn't erase what she'd done, didn't bring back the dead. But it meant their deaths had purchased something other than her freedom. Her phone rang. The number was blocked. She almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won. "Hello? Mrs. Draven?" The voice was unfamiliar, male, careful. My name is Alexander Petrov. I'm calling on behalf of the Constantine cartel. Serafina's hand tightened on the phone. I don't own the cartel anymore. No, but you restructured it before the federal seizure. Implemented protocols that have made it significantly more profitable. We've been watching your work. A pause. We'd like to offer you a consulting position. Advisory role, very lucrative, very discreet. I'm not interested. Mrs. Draven, that's not my name anymore. And whatever you're offering, the answer is no. I'm out of that world. I'm staying out. Even if staying out means leaving billions on the table? Especially then. Serafina looked at the ocean. Money costs too much. Power costs more. I'm done paying that price. That's disappointing, but understandable. Petrov's voice softened. For what it's worth, what you did, standing up to Lucian Draven, building something from nothing, destroying a man everyone thought was untouchable, that took courage. The kind our world needs more of. Your world nearly killed me. Yes, but it didn't. You survived. That makes you dangerous in the best possible way. A pause. If you change your mind, this number will reach me. Good luck, Mrs. Morrison. The line went dead. Serafina stared at the phone. The ocean roared in front of her, eternal and indifferent. She thought about that other life, about power and money, and the rush of destroying enemies, about being someone who mattered instead of someone who just existed. Then she thought about Dmitri bleeding out on pavement, about Giovanni shot dead at an airfield, about 23 people killed because she'd decided to fight back. She deleted Petrov's number, walked down to the water's edge, and let the waves wash over her bare feet, cold and clean and utterly unconcerned with human drama. This was enough. This small life, this quiet existence, this slow rebuilding of something that resembled peace. It had to be enough. Because the alternative, returning to that world, becoming that person again, would mean everything she'd sacrificed had been for nothing. The sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Serafina watched until the last light faded, then turned and walked back toward her cottage on the cliff. Inside, she made tea, sat at the small table where she graded papers from her students, opened a book about normal things, gardening, maybe, or cooking, something that had nothing to do with empires or revenge or survival. Her old life felt like something that had happened to someone else. Maybe it had. Maybe the woman who'd worn crimson and diamonds and declared war had died in that warehouse. Maybe Elena Morrison was who'd been born from the ashes. Or maybe they were the same person, just older and wiser and more honest about the costs of freedom. Serafina, Elena, didn't know. But she was learning to live with uncertainty, learning to accept that some questions didn't have answers, that some victories looked like defeats, that sometimes surviving was the only triumph available. She sipped her tea and watched the ocean through her window and thought about Lucien in his cell, counting days that would never end. Did he think about her? Did he regret what he'd done? Did he understand, finally, that owning someone and loving someone were completely different things? Probably not. Monsters rarely learned. They just got caged. And the people who'd been their victims learned to live with the scars. Elena set down her tea, picked up her book, read about soil pH and companion planting and the patience required to make things grow. Outside, night settled over the ocean. Stars appeared one by one, ancient light from long-dead suns. And on a beach in a country whose name didn't matter, a woman who'd once destroyed a criminal empire simply because she could sat reading about tomatoes and feeling something that might, eventually, become peace. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined. It wasn't triumphant or dramatic or satisfying. It was just real. And after everything, after the blood and the betrayal and the bodies stacked like cordwood, real was enough. Real was everything. Real was survival. And survival, Elena had learned, was its own kind of victory. The ocean kept crashing against the rocks. The stars kept burning. The world kept turning. And somewhere in that vast indifference, a woman who'd once been a mafia queen learned to tend a garden and call it freedom. Epilogue. 3 years after the trial, a letter arrived at the language school where Elena Morrison taught. No return address. Postmarked from a federal facility in Colorado. She almost threw it away unopened. But curiosity, that fatal flaw that had started everything, made her break the seal. Inside a single page, Lucien's handwriting. Kara, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. What I did to you, what I took from you, the cage I built and called it love. Prison gives you time to think, too much time. I've spent 3 years reliving every moment of our marriage, every dismissal, every cruelty. Every time I looked at you and saw property instead of a person. You were right to destroy me. I was a monster. Maybe I still am. But you were wrong about one thing. You said I never loved you. That's not true. I loved you the only way I knew how. Possessively, selfishly, violently. I just didn't know love was supposed to set people free. I know that now. Too late, but I know it. I hope wherever you are, whoever you've become, you found the freedom you fought for. I hope it was worth the cost. I hope you're happy. And I hope sometimes you remember that I wasn't always a monster. That once, for a brief moment, I was just a man who loved a woman and didn't know how to do it right. Goodbye, Serafina. I won't write again. L. Elena stood in her small kitchen, holding that letter, and felt tears she hadn't expected. Not for Lucienne, for the girl she'd been 7 years ago, the one who'd believed in fairy tales, who'd thought love could change monsters into men. That girl was dead, but maybe she deserved to be mourned anyway. Elena walked to her fireplace, held the letter over the flames, watched it catch, curl, turn to ash. Then she went outside to her garden, where tomatoes grew in neat rows and herbs perfumed the air, and she planted new seeds in dark soil. Because that was what survivors did. They burned the past, and they planted futures, and they kept going day after day until the scars faded enough to forget they'd ever bled. The ocean roared in the distance. The seeds waited in the earth. And Elena Morrison, who had once been Serafina Vale, who had once destroyed an empire to claim her own life, knelt in the dirt and chose growth over vengeance, chose peace over power, chose herself. Finally, completely, forever. The end. In the underworld where power decides everything, one truth echoes louder than all others. The most dangerous enemy is the one you were certain you already owned. But sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying your oppressor. It's learning to build a life worth living without them. Freedom isn't purchased with violence. It's earned through the courage to walk away and the strength to keep walking, even when every step feels impossible. This is a story about cages and keys, monsters and survivors, and the terrible, beautiful cost of choosing yourself when the world demands you disappear.